Hi, welcome to the session on Policy as Code, achieve compliance, audit, and policy requirements through automation in the cloud. My name is Tong Seng, and I'm a solutions architect here at Amazon Web Services. In my role as a solutions architect, I've had the privilege to work with innovative customers such as the Government Technology Agency of Singapore, or GovTech, who we are glad to join us today for this session. Andrew Nai, who is a lead cloud infrastructure architect, will be co-presenting this session with me. In terms of agenda, we will start off talking about the challenge of compliance, both on-premise as well as in the cloud. We will share how you can leverage the cloud capabilities to raise the bar on the compliance game and achieve continuous compliance on AWS using various AWS services. Next, we will hear more from GovTech on their journey into implementing policy as code and end off with some takeaways. Let's get started. The challenge of compliance is not a new thing. In fact, it is still a heavily manual and unautomated process. 80% of customers surveyed reported that they still rely on manual steps or manual processes to collect audit data. Because it is a manual process, human data collection ultimately also makes it difficult to verify the integrity, accuracy, and completeness of data, and the risk of data tampering is always present. It is a time-consuming process, with customers spending an average of 232 workdays per year responding to audit evidence requests. Another issue with taking too long to complete audits is the risk of prolonged exposure. Identified issues are not rectified or addressed until audit cycles are completed. The cost of compliance is also high, with an average yearly cost per organization of $4.7 million for organizations with 16 or more regulations to comply with. This motivates a just-in-time attitude towards compliance, rushing to achieve compliance status only when an audit is nearing. As organizations increasingly embrace the cloud by implementing or migrating workloads, they quickly reap the benefits of agility and experimentation. This allows organizations to quickly prototype ideas and iterate on them. However, as we all know, with great powers comes great responsibilities. Customers want the agility that the cloud brings, but also need good security and governance practices to protect their cloud environment. In many cases, they need to meet very strict compliance requirements as well. Now, the speed and scale at which cloud resources operate makes it impossible to use some of the traditional mechanisms to track resources like spreadsheets and static databases. Take, for example, an auto-scaling group, or an EMR cluster, or a Fargate cluster. These services are spinning up and down resources all the time as your usage scales. And as that happens, you need to make sure that you are meeting compliance requirements around security and configuration. Now, you can see how that can be a challenge when operating infrastructure on the cloud. The Institute of Internal Auditors, or IIA, recommends the 3 lines of defense combined assurance model, and it is in widespread use across in corporate and public sector organizations today. One of the key benefits of AWS is that we provide services to help you manage assurance at all 3 lines. In many organizations today, it is typical to have the first and second lines of defense managed by DevOps, IT, and security teams, while the third line of defense belongs to internal, risk, governance, and audit teams. The first line of defense is concerning the establishment of management controls and generally has a real-time focus. It is aimed at reviewing governance and compliance arrangements to demonstrate that checks and balances are working effectively. AWS services on the first line of defense includes AWS CloudTrail for auditing AWS API actions, AWS Config for tracking configuration changes over time, and AWS Control Tower, which offers an easy method to roll out a multi-account strategy and instituting organization-wide guardrails that meet AWS best practices. The second line of defense centers on risk oversight or management and involves some degree of real-time activity with a mandate to review first line of defense activities. This encompasses the work of specialist areas like risk management, technical and regulatory compliance, and safety. It aims to confirm the effectiveness of compliance and governance arrangement and to identify and action improvements. AWS services in the second line of defense include AWS Security Hub. AWS Security Hub provides a comprehensive view of the security state on AWS. The third line of defense involves independent assurance that evaluate the adequacy and effectiveness of both first-line and second-line risk management approaches. This is typically undertaken by internal auditors to independently confirm governance and compliance effectiveness and recommend improvements. AWS Audit Manager is a service built to assist risk and governance teams with the third line of defense. Let's dive into each of these lines of defense to see how they work in detail through the lens of AWS services. AWS Config is a service that is part of the first line of defense. AWS Config allows you to assess, audit, and evaluate configuration of AWS resources automatically. This is done across several steps. First is something we call AWS Config Recording. What is config recording? Config recording is a service by which you can track changes to the configuration of your AWS resources. When you create or update a resource, it will create something called a configuration item, which will be delivered to an S3 bucket of your choosing. You will be able to see a timeline view of how your configuration resources have been changing. Today, with AWS Config Recording, we support up to 114 resource types across 40 different AWS services, and we are continuously adding more services that can work with AWS Config Recording. Not only can you record AWS resources, but you can also record third-party resources using config recording. The way you do that is using a feature we call custom config resource, where you can bring in a resource that is residing on-premise or anywhere else. So, AWS Config Recording is a fundamental part of overall AWS Config service. The next service that is built on top of config recording is what we call as config rules. Config rules are essentially logic that is run to evaluate the configuration of AWS resources and determine if they are compliant or not. There are two types of config rules. The first being AWS managed rules, which are offered out of the box, and AWS manages this on an ongoing basis. If you have an internal security policy that mandates data at rest encryption, for example, one of the managed rules you can turn on is the one for EBS volume encryption. Anytime an EBS volume is created or updated, the configuration item generated is evaluated against the managed rule for compliance. Upon detection of non-compliance, an automated action can be taken within the cloud to remediate. To further augment what is already available as managed rules, we have custom config rules, which are evaluation logic that customers can create on their own. These are executed within a Lambda function to evaluate a resource according to their needs. Custom config rules provide customers the ability to adapt any internal policy requirement into what is essentially code, hence policy as code, and instruct AWS to do the hard work of continuously monitoring and checking that all required resources comply with your policy. You can now tailor AWS config to execute and check resources according to your specific organizational needs through a combination of either managed rules or custom rules. With config rules, you can also set up on how the rules are being evaluated, such as change-triggered or scheduled. For change-triggered config rules, as soon as a tracked resource is created or updated, we are going to evaluate that resource for compliance. Another way of triggering config rules is on a periodic basis. You may have an audit requirement that needs to ensure compliance on a 24-hourly basis. You can then schedule config rules to execute compliance check daily at a specific time of day and store the status as evidence for your auditor to retrieve. The next part is how are other AWS services using config rules. There are other services in AWS that provide compliance-related capability. They also build on top of config rules as the underlying services that check against controls, guardrails, and findings that each of these services monitor against. We will talk about how this works for both Security Hub and AWS Conformance packs later on. To have all your compliance evaluation executing, you need config rules and config recording to make those work. Let's dig a little deeper into Conformance packs. The Conformance pack is nothing but a collection of AWS config rules. You can have up to 130 config rules per conformance pack. A conformance pack also exists as a unique entity within AWS and has its own Amazon Resource Number, or ARN. This helps make conformance packs referenceable for use across all AWS organization accounts from a delegated security admin account. You can group all the managed and custom config rules that correspond to your internal security organization policies or compliance regime into conformance pack for deployment across your AWS organization. When deployed, this forms an immutable baseline, which means an individual tenant accounts or member accounts cannot alter these rules. This ensures that any compliance data obtained from the evaluation has the necessary integrity and accuracy for any future audit. Within conformance packs, we have something called a process check rule, where you are not checking for the compliance of a particular resource configuration, but instead checking if a particular process was completed or not. For example, it could be to check whether a result has been verified by an auditor. When this is done, you can input this as a data point to capture as part of an overall compliance regime. Other benefits of conformance packs include simplification of reporting, where you are able to obtain the status of compliance for the entire conformance pack, thereby indicating an overall compliance against organization policy. AWS also provides more than 50 conformance packs out of the box for various operation best practices and industry compliance regimes. In the second line of defense, we have AWS Security Hub. The purpose of the second line of defense is to provide risk oversight and management, and the focus is being able to identify and prioritize risks for remediation and action. This is where AWS Security Hub comes in. Security Hub gives you a comprehensive view of your security alerts and posture across your AWS accounts. AWS Security Hub aggregates and organizes alerts coming in from multiple AWS services, such as threats and alerts from Amazon Guard Duty, vulnerability scans made by AWS Inspector on EC2, Amazon Macie, which scans S3 buckets for sensitive data, as well as third-party partner solution integrations. All of these findings get aggregated in Security Hub as a central location and can be prioritized by severity and other factors to act on. You also have the ability to continuously monitor your environment using automated security checks based on AWS security best practices that we recommend, and industry standards such as PCI DSS and CIS benchmarks in order to get a full security posture of your environment. You can also remediate centrally from using custom remediation playbooks with AWS Lambda or use your own third-party tool integrations. Security Hub will give you a single pane of glass to view findings across security services, audit your posture, and take action accordingly. AWS Security Hubs also allows you to incorporate custom findings that are tailored for any unique organization policy requirements. These are reported into AWS Security Hub and presented to you as data points for consideration and risk assessment. An example of custom finding can present itself as a custom config rule, which we covered earlier, and through integration with AWS EventBridge and AWS Lambda, be added into AWS Security Hub using the Batch Import Findings API. At the third line of defense, AWS Audit Manager helps you continuously audit your AWS usage and simplify how you assess risk and compliance with regulations and industry standards. AWS Audit Manager uses pre-built frameworks to map your AWS usage to control requirements, which are grouped in accordance to the requirements of an industry standards or regulation. You can also fully customize the frameworks and its controls to tailor them for your unique needs. AWS Audit Manager saves time by automating evidence collection and organizing it according to each control requirement. This helps reduce the manual effort that often happens for audit and helps you scale your audit capability in the cloud as your business grows. You can instead focus your effort in reviewing the evidence collected to ensure that your policies, procedures, and activities, also known as controls, are operating as intended. With AWS Audit Manager, you can be prepared to produce audit-ready reports at any time. An audit-ready report includes a report summary file and contains links to the relevant evidence folders which are organized according to the controls that are specified in your assessment. The evidence AWS Audit Manager continuously collects from AWS services becomes a record containing the information needed to demonstrate compliance against control requirements. You can review and select the relevant evidence to include in your final audit report. AWS Audit Manager securely stores evidence in its own managed storage repository with read-only permissions granted to your end users. This allows you to ensure the integrity of any assessment report and evidence collected. When you generate audit-ready reports, Audit Manager produces a report file checksum, so you can validate that the report evidence remains unaltered. Both the summary report and evidence can be downloaded and be shared with your auditors. Streamline collaboration across teams by assigning controls in your assessment to subject matter experts to review. For example, you might delegate a security control to a network security engineer to confirm the evidence properly demonstrates compliance. Audit Manager also allows team members to comment on evidence, upload manual evidence, and update the status of each control. So, to bring it all together, AWS services can help make a difference by simplifying the manual work needed for audit and deliver knock-on benefits such as time reduction and cost reductions. With AWS, you can rest assured that data required for your compliance and audit needs remain immutable, reliable, and tamper-proof. Create always-on, always monitoring continuous compliance to keep your resource usage in check and do this at scale. AWS services allow you to customize and tailor checks and evaluation according to your unique compliance policy and audit requirements. Use built-in automation and integration capabilities to reduce the exposure to non-compliance by taking remediation action in real time. This brings me to the most exciting section. Let's now hear it from GovTech on how they have used the cloud to enable their continuous compliance capability and enforcement of government policies.
Thanks, Tong Sing, for the earlier introduction. Let me give a quick introduction to myself and my organization. I'm Andrew Nai. I'm a lead cloud infrastructure architect from Government Digital Service, GovTech. I have been working on the Government Commercial Cloud, GCC, since its conceptualization in 2018. GovTech stands for the Government Technology Agency, and it's the implementing agencies under the Smart Nation and Digital Government Office. GovTech plays a vital role in materializing Singapore's Smart Nation vision that can be broadly classified into three areas: products, services, cybersecurity, and governance. Government Commercial Cloud, GCC, is a platform that provides a suite of baseline services, including cloud account vending, network, security, management, and building services built on top of Commercial Cloud. GCC provides a framework for government to increase the adoption of Commercial Cloud while complying to governance and security policies. As Singapore government is deploying more systems to govern Commercial Cloud in a more agile manner, misconfigurations in cloud infrastructures are a common cause of data breaches. For example, many cloud services are not secure by default. S3 encryption not enabled, default security groups allows unrestricted outbound traffic, load balancers, loggings not enabled, etc. Most organizations adopt industry security practices to perform security audits before system commissioning and thereafter at regular intervals. Such fixed scheduled audits are, however, becoming inadequate to detect and remediate misconfigurations early in between audits. Prior to the adoption of AWS security products across all GCC accounts, there was also a lack of coherent central view of compliance rules and findings across all accounts. This used to be scattered across different commercial off-the-shelf and cloud-native security products. In addition, there were operational overheads to GCC central team to onboard accounts and maintain up-to-date industry security standards in cost-based products. Speed. The inherent support for event-based in AWS Config and Event Bridge to trigger security assessment is a powerful feature. This reduces the latencies in security assessments to detect and remediate non-compliance and malicious activities as compared to periodic security assessment in commercial off-the-shelf-based products. Cloud-native security products are SaaS-based products that can be subscribed on demand and fast to deploy. Simplicity. The auto-enable feature in AWS Security Hubs performs automatic tenants onboarding, which greatly reduces customers' effort in tenant onboarding management. AWS Security Hub's ability to provide insights from relevant findings aggregated from cloud-native security products like AWS Config, AWS Inspector, AWS GovTech, and AWS WAF, etc., and third-party products greatly simplifies both tenants and GCC SecOps effort to correlate different findings across different products. Sustainability. To fulfill an organization's ongoing governance needs, Conformance Pack is a YAML listing referencing existing AWS Config managed or custom rules and remediation that can be easily customized. AWS maintains industry security standards up to date, which reduces operational effort to customers. The above scenario lists some of the managed and custom AWS config rules used in our environment for continuous compliance. What is an AWS config rule? An AWS config rule represents the desired configuration settings for specific AWS resources or for an entire AWS account. If a resource violates a rule, AWS config flags the resource and the rule as non-compliant, and AWS config notifies you through Amazon SNS. Managed rules either originate natively from AWS config and the enablement of security standards. AWS config provides AWS managed rules, which are predefined, customizable rules used to evaluate whether AWS resources comply with common best practices. In situations where organization has specific cybersecurity policies requirements that cannot be fulfilled by managed rules, AWS config supports custom rules. Each custom rule is associated with an AWS Lambda function, which contains the logic that evaluates whether AWS resource complies with the rule either in response to configuration changes or periodically. The function then evaluates whether the resource complies with the rule and sends its evaluation results to AWS config. The types of triggers that can evoke both AWS config managed and custom rules are periodic, applying to scenario A and D. AWS config runs evaluation for the rule at a frequency that you choose. For example, every 24 hours. Configuration changes, applying to scenario B, E, and F. AWS config runs evaluation for the rule when certain types of resources are created, changed, or deleted. A scope in AWS config rules defines which resources triggers the evaluation based on the following: one or more resource types, a combination of a resource type and a resource ID, a combination of a tag key and value, when any recorded resources is created, updated, or deleted. AWS config runs the evaluation when it detects a change to a resource that matches the rule's scope. Alternatively, Amazon EventBridge can evoke an AWS Lambda function to perform evaluation in response to system events automatically and sends its evaluation results through AWS Security Hub. These system events can be user action events that can result in resource or non-resource configuration changes. This is a busy slide. Let me orientate you starting from the left to right. In the upper left corner, a user or system activity triggers system events to AWS config. These events matched to the AWS config scope can trigger either managed rules or evoke a Lambda defined in custom rules to start the evaluation. The evaluation assesses if the changes in resource configuration remains in compliance and log these findings to the tenant's AWS Security Hub. These findings in AWS Security Hub have a retention period of 90 days from first observed. AWS Security Hub supports integration and aggregation of findings from other AWS managed security products, such as AWS Firewall Manager, GovTech, Inspector, IAM Access Analyzer, as well as third-party products. These aggregated findings in each tenant's accounts provides a visibility in overall current security status to spot trends, identify potential issues, and take the necessary remediation steps. In an organization setting, the tenant's findings across accounts are consolidated into the organization AWS Security Hub in near real time. This allows GCC team to have up-to-date central visibility on security status across accounts. AWS Security Hub forwards all findings and insights to Event Bridge. Event Bridge rules can be configured to trigger notification through Amazon SNS or piped to a central log bucket with Amazon CloudWatch logs. Similar to the previous slides, we start with a user or system activity triggering system events to AWS Event Bridge in the upper left corner. Events from AWS services are delivered to Event Bridge in near real time and on a guarantee basis. Events such as describe, list, get actions that does not result in resource configuration changes can be configured using Event Bridge rules to automate checks. The rules can evoke a Lambda to evaluate the compliance to such actions and log the findings to AWS Security Hub. The benefits after adopting cloud security native products for continuous compliance is the ability to adopt a consistent security compliance baselines across GCC. This is achieved through up-to-date industry security standards maintained by the CSP, through close collaboration with our cybersecurity counterparts. GCC team is constantly updated with the latest internal security policies. These policies are codified centrally and rolled out to all GCC accounts, benefiting agencies in adopting a consistent security compliance baseline. Continuous compliance instills the culture to detect and remediate misconfiguration in a more frequent manner. Hence, agencies benefit from a reduction in their remediation efforts during fixed schedule security audits. To GCC team, Cloud Native Security product provides central visibility on findings aggregated across all GCC accounts. This helps relevant stakeholders gain timely status on the impact radius to cybersecurity threats and vulnerabilities. Before I wrap up my segment, I would like to briefly share where our next focus is at with our continuous compliance journey. First, we are looking at internalizing industry security standards into our compliance requirements. Common standards includes multi-factor authentication standards, password policy standards, and data encryption at rest standards, just to name a few. It will really be helpful if AWS supports the creation custom tagging so that we can apply custom tags on the industry standards we need in AWS Security Hub and group them for internal policy use. Another area which is important to us is around custom config rules creation. While it is possible to write the necessary code in AWS Lambda to perform evaluation logic, there's still some complexity involved. It will be much better if there's a no-code or low-code way to do this. It could use simple logic building blocks with Boolean operators and also support the ability to mix and match some of the managed rules to form a more advanced evaluation logic. This will really simplify the adoption of continuous compliance, not just for us, but many like-minded customers as well. Lastly, I would like to store findings from AWS Security Hub directly to S3, because this will make our overall central logging architecture much more straightforward and simpler in terms of the amount of engineering needed. With that, I would like to hand the time back to Tong Sing, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Andrew. Let's move on to sum up some of the key takeaways from today's session. First, using the cloud does not mean you cannot stay compliant with your organization's policies and standards. On the contrary, the use of the cloud ushers in a new paradigm wherein scale, automation, and programmability can help you achieve better compliance results in your organization. The next important point I would like you to take away is the 3 lines model. How does each line play a role, and the AWS services you can use to perform at each line. AWS offers a wide set of compliance tools for our customers to use and build a comprehensive compliance regime fit for their organization requirements. Start implementing continuous compliance into your organization. The sooner you do, the faster you can start reducing the manual effort for compliance while implementing the necessary safeguards and lower risk for your organization. Finally, if you are unsure where to start small. Turn on some of the built-in compliance standards in AWS Security Hub. Use built-in managed config rules and conformance specs in AWS Config. Then, as you get a better understanding of the services, you can start looking at converting some of your organization policies into custom rules. We encourage you to get engaged with our training and certification content today. Skill Builder is our online learning center that makes it easier for anyone, from beginners to experienced professional, to build AWS cloud skills. We offer 500 plus free digital courses that can help you and your team build new cloud skills and learn about the latest services when and where is convenient in up to 16 languages. Within Skill Builder, take advantage of flexible learning plans, which offer suggested digital courses aligned to a specific domain or job role. As you build your skills, consider preparing for one of our 11 AWS certifications. These industry-recognized certifications span foundational, professional, and specialty levels to validate AWS knowledge and skills, building your credibility and confidence. We invite you to join the AWS Certified community, which brings together AWS certified practitioners and builders in an exclusive online community. You will be participating in discussion forums, learning and networking opportunities, and challenges from the AWS team to earn rewards and recognition. Scan one or both of the QR codes on the screen to get started with your cloud skills training and certification. Thank you for your time and attention for this session. Please complete the session survey to help us improve your submit experience.